So, with that tiny wee introduction, I'll just introduce my own. This is just 8 slides here, nothing very amazing. To remind you all of the aims of this World Federation World Leadership Dialogue. And it is indeed to build on, and obviously some people have been thinking about it, ideas on how the World Federation of Public Health Associations in individual countries and PHAs can act on these issues, on global finance, taxation, poverty, sustainability. They're all interlinked. What do we do? It may indeed not be possible to, in a very major way, to talk about the Melbourne demand for action tomorrow, but what I do think is possible and what I would really like us to encourage to move forward on is ideas for a resolution. Again, the time is too short. We haven't thought about this enough and engaged with each other enough on issues to do with what that resolution would look like. But we certainly have time to do it for the next general gathering of the World Federation, which will of course be next year. So this is an annual process of gathering resolutions. And so that's what we really want your ideas on, what we want to advocate for, and it is a bit difficult sometimes because obviously ideas will differ, so it's what we advocate for and how we do it. So ideas just in very, very simple terms, in terms of what we advocate for, based on the SDGs, reduced inequality through, and there are these basic ideas for how we could do that from Ron, increased income for workers, equity-oriented tax measures, whatever they involve. And increased sustainability through law and policies on production and consumption. Equity-oriented tax measures, as mentioned both by Ron and by Miranda, could have to be at the national and international level. So let's have a start about what those could be. And in terms of how we do this, achieving some sort of a transformative global platform, I'm suggesting could involve forming a special interest group amongst World Federation members, or some sort of idea of special interest group or network, people who are interested in these ideas, framing a resolution for next year, and developing policy positions. My own country, New Zealand, we don't have a policy on global finance. We do have ones on trade and investment. We have a little bit on taxation, but not very much. So I think it's really important that we, as PHA member countries, engage and try and frame up our own issues. So the World Federation process is, there's just an ordinary mechanical process for it. In terms of other ideas on how, I think we really have a lot of work to do, not just in building our own skills, but on communicating the connections between global finance, poverty, health, and environmental issues. We need to establish partnerships between health groups and others, such as tax justice, which you have here in Australia, we don't in New Zealand. And we have to establish a right to be heard on these issues. So in brief, and could we leave this up here, the discussion is about, and just throw open ideas of your own, but also ask questions if you want to, throw up ideas and share them with other people in the audience, but also I'll be inviting comments, of course, from our panelists on both what should we advocate for as public health in this area, what policies and resolutions do we think will achieve those aims, and how do we go about doing it. So, if I could have any volunteers for first taker and contributing to that discussion, I'd be very keen to hear. Yes, go up there.
First, thank you all for such a great panel. Just to kind of build on what you're saying, I just am curious to hear people's comments on maybe the role of health and or health impact assessments analysis on some more financial policies. Often, based in California, and we've seen that increasingly for kind of local taxes, but I don't know the larger context globally, how they're used or maybe potential opportunities for using that tool. Thank you.
Would you like to open, Ron? Or Miranda?
Why don't we
Or
take
David?
a few more questions first? People, comments, questions.
All right, yep, good idea. So that's good. So yes, if you'd like to.
John Boffa, look, I think as public health people we need a bit more clarity about the taxes for equity. There's so many different taxes, and yet I don't think there's enough. And, in primary healthcare, we developed a core services platform that's really clearly articulated, it's evidence-based, and we've been implementing it. But if we're wanting progressive taxation and taxes for equity, what are the best ones? Like for right now, the Labor Party's debating quite seriously a minimum 35% tax for all people earning more than $300,000. That's one tax for equity. Then there's inheritance taxes. There's debates about capital gains tax, fringe benefits tax. What are the best? We should have a core suite of taxes, not just one. And even an inheritance tax, depending on how you set it, it could generate a lot of income. I wouldn't dismiss it so quickly and say the way they've been implemented, they don't generate that much. But there's ways of imagining, and Piketty's version of it would generate quite a lot. So, but I think we need to be clearer about. I'd like people to comment on whether we're clear enough about which particular taxes are the best ones to be advocating to achieve equity.
Thank you. And we'll just take one more question, perhaps from you, Peter, and then we'll get comments from all our panellists on all those different issues. And then we'll take the next bunch. So don't despair, people who I'm not talking to right now. So, Peter.
I think it's more a comment in terms of where we go forward in terms of process. I think we need to do some resolutions into the World Federation of Public Health Associations group so that they begin to get some of this message. And I'm just going to sort of steal your meeting for a very brief moment, if that's okay, just to read out some comments on the declaration of this conference. It comes to us on pre-printed, which suggests that it's not open for negotiation. It doesn't mention climate change. It doesn't mention reducing wealth inequalities. It doesn't mention armaments or reducing armaments. It doesn't reduce protecting and promoting ecosystems and promoting environmental health. It doesn't mention promoting equity and access to resources and opportunity. There's a whole lot of things that are just totally silent in this document, which I think for a major meeting such as the one that we're at are thunderous silences that cannot be let go past. And so, I don't know what to do because I don't think we can amend this. I think it's already gone through its process of drafting, and unlike the statement in Calcutta, we weren't given an opportunity to have a look at it before it went into this format. So if anybody's interested in doing something, please see me, and then I'll stop disrupting your meeting. But I do think that maybe one of the way forwards is to in this bigger discussion of what we've been discussing here today, we think about getting some resolutions into the WFPHA so that they can begin to take some of these messages on board and become less tentative about them all.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, could we respond to that? I'll ask our three panellists to respond to those various issues. You don't all have to respond to all of them, but yeah, just any comments from you, and then we'll return to the next bunch of comments. And in the end, perhaps we'll come back to that question of where do we go next that's just been posed as a challenge. But in the meantime...
Okay, as a kind of interested fellow traveler around issues of taxation, sitting next to somebody who specializes in that area, I'm going to wade into the deep water and make a few suggestions that she may or may not agree with, but nonetheless, I think the first thing is to recall that wonderful saying from Oliver Wendell Holmes, the American jurist, that taxes are the price we pay for a civilized world. This is important in terms of any kind of campaign about what kind of just taxes that we might try to create for equity purposes, because we've had 30 or 40 years of an assault on the idea that taxes are good at all. In Canada, there was a right-wing think tank called the Fraser Institute, one of the kind of neoliberal babies, that has for years put forward the libertarian kind of idea of tax-free day, which is as they market it, it's when you finally start working for yourself and not for the bad government. So one of the things that we've suggested that we need to campaign for is a day without government. So that basically means on this day without government, you cannot use any service that has partially been funded through state programs. So you can imagine when you wake up in the morning, you can't have a glass of water. You'll have no electricity. You may be able to walk out the sidewalk to the door, to the road, but you won't be able to go any further. Your kids can't go to school. If you're sick, tough luck, just sort of like write it out. So just beginning to really reinforce the fact that there's so many of the things that we take for granted that are actually dependent upon taxation. And so the notion that somehow, if we got rid of taxes, life would be good, to challenge that. Now, although I've made some kind of rather disparaging comments about consumption taxes, it is true that one needs to have a strong set of consumption taxes. But as you increase those taxes, especially dependent upon what they're applied to, they can be quite regressive in terms of low-income people. So if you are taxing essential commodities for life or for healthy living at a very high value-added taxation rate, it's going to hurt them much more than it's going to hurt people who are wealthy. But you can't build progressive consumption taxes. So as you move up to the non-essentials, you could have a higher rate of consumption taxes. I also think that we can advocate for much higher marginal rates on income tax. And that could be, whether we call it direct income tax or whether it comes through a social security tax, the net effect would essentially be the same. And some of the studies coming out of the States have argued that we could easily have marginal rates of 65 or 70%, which is what they once were back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, without really affecting even traditional measures of economic growth. Others have sort of said as much. If we wanted to have economic optimality, where we're reducing poverty and creating more solidarity and stronger well-being, the marginal tax rate at the higher end could even be as much as 90% on incomes that are in the millions of dollars range. And there's a hard left campaigner now running for French president who's actually, I can't remember the figure, but sort of said 100% taxation up at that level. Now that poses difficulties in the sense that we've given away, kind of opened the doors to hypermobile capital. So alongside any kind of campaign for more equitable taxes is we have to also have a campaign for capital controls that would allow countries to essentially slow down the international movement of capital from country to country. That could also be applied in terms of the kind of slowing down tax competition by ensuring that, because governments keep the tax competition going, invoking the need for foreign direct investment. Well, if countries started to begin to put in withholding taxes on that investment, which is a kind of capital control, that would sort of slow down some of the tax competition that is driving down tax rates in many countries. And finally, I said kind of a point that I think is health impact assessments. Yes, we should start undertaking those, especially in terms of what the lack of progressivity in taxes, how that translates into what might be otherwise preventable forms of morbidity and mortality, which brings me to the last point. I think we have to criminalize and imprison willful tax avoidance. Recently in Canada, it came up KPMG, right? If you go outside and you look, and you'll see their building right there across the river, looking very nice and very high and mighty in the sky. KPMG was involved with a number of banks in Canada and high-income individuals to set up all kinds of questionably legal shell companies in offshore tax havens in the Caribbean. And they knew that what they were doing was wrong and even pressed against the edges of the law. Do you think that it's likely that they'll actually ever get charged? Probably not. And there were secret deals when this was found out, and some of the high-income people were sort of actually on the risk of being identified publicly. The government did a little sweet deal saying, you give us back some of the taxes that you've probably illegally avoided, and we won't embarrass you, and we won't charge anybody. So I think we have to have a campaign to essentially criminalize this international system of tax avoidance. And if you could get a lawyer, a really kind of rabid lawyer, who decided to tackle it as a human rights issue or as a criminal issue, pointing out how many avoidable deaths or premature deaths might have been avoided through different forms of investment in public goods that couldn't take place because of this activity of tax avoidance, you might generate a whole lot more interest amongst the general public.
Miranda.
Thank you. It's very nice to have such deference paid to me. I assure you, when I'm at tax conferences, the reverse happens. So, I'm just enjoying that, and I'm just going to keep my special knowledge secret and contained and not share it with anybody else. The dark arts of tax policy. I know very little about health impact evaluation, so I don't think I can comment on that specifically, but there is, Australia now has human rights evaluation of every federal act. I'm not sure if you knew that. It's pretty recent. They have to do an impact statement with every legislation. Really, it's too late, right? It's already there. Policy's already been made. It does seem to me that the evidence for broad public funding of more or less universal public goods, and yes, that means rich people do get to send their kids to state schools if they choose to do so, right? Universal public goods and income relief for the poor, I think it's pretty clear the systemic stats show that that's good for public health. Right? So I'm not sure that we need health impact evaluation of tax measures. I think what you need is, you're essentially evaluating government as a whole when you do that, right? It's about what the role of the state actually is. I completely agree with Ron that we need a day that says what would happen if you didn't have government, and that's why I keep coming back to that being the political locus. And I realise I didn't say anything about corporate tax really in this talk, and I could have, obviously. Multinational corporate tax evasion and avoidance is a big issue. Profit shifting is an issue. Big Pharma are involved pretty heavily in profit shifting, and together with their regulatory capture, they have more or less captured some elements of corporate tax systems across countries. So there is some money there are issues there, and some kind of public statement that contested that, the kind of work Tax Justice Network does. That's obviously a useful thing to do in intervening in public debate. But I would urge public health activists to also bring your focus closer to home and really to push governments to deliver public goods, because that is really what is going to achieve public health outcomes, and that requires adequate taxation. So to come to the last comment, so we have the the past is not a guide to the future, really. That's what they say. So we have the 20th century to look at. Successful taxes in the 20th century were the income tax, the value-added tax, property taxes, some kinds of land taxes, and on a small but important level, wealth and inheritance taxes. Right? That's what we've got. Trade taxes for poor countries, right? Import and excise duties, some excises. So carbon emissions tax is the big thing, right? That we actually know can work to change behaviour, to make sustainable economies, of course, and actually can raise revenue. And unfortunately, we enacted one in this country, and by its second year of operation, it was raising $6 billion a year, and then we repealed it. So the politics, of course, are not straightforward. And the politics come back to, I think, the delivery of public benefit in other ways to the population and trust in government. So although I agree that a wealth tax is a valuable part of the tool and an income and an inheritance tax, I would reiterate that the core taxes, the core funding of the big public spending in states that we have seen that have been successful in raising living standards and delivering equality and public health are income tax, taxes on wages, and big broad-based consumption taxes with appropriate compensation for low-income people. So that would be my script.
David, do you want to?
I think we should keep the discussion flowing.
Right, could I have anybody else who would like to come up? And we'll take a couple of, about 3 comments, 3 questions, and then have another, do it batch by batch. I'd like to go first.
Thank you. My name's Gail Duncan. I just want to bring something, say, positive to the discussion. I've just put my glasses on. Recently read from a working paper from Victoria University Institute for Governance and Policy Studies about permanent forest bonds, a pioneering environmental impact bond for Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that's just one example of some new financial instruments that are available to support, from a financial perspective, development of your environmental and other perhaps health issues. I was wondering if you had any comments on that.
Okay, so we'll hold that thought and go to you.
Hi, I'm Val Kay. I'm from Monash University. I think that all of the suggestions that have been made so far by the panel are pragmatically good suggestions, but I guess what I'd also like to say is going beyond the pragmatic situation that we've got and looking at, I suppose, the broader overarching issues. I've been looking very closely at institutionalised inequalities and hierarchies and the institutionalised exploitative attitude that we have in our society, in Australia, where here I'm from, and in many others, and how they've come about. And I guess without going through it all again, it's to do with kingdom structures, the development of kingdom structures that predates capitalism, although capitalism's obviously important, but these predate capitalism. And it might be thought that we've got rid of these by democracy and parliamentary representation. I don't think anything like that has happened. We still have kingdoms in all our organisations. And when you think about those 8 people or whatever it is that own half the world's wealth, you can probably think that in some ways kingdom structures are worse than they ever have been. So I guess what I'm saying is that what I think we should be doing in public health is really calling for getting rid of hierarchies. So that's what I mean, it's very out there, getting rid of hierarchies and also looking at our own organisations, our own universities, departments of health, non-government organisations, and really questioning why do they work on hierarchical structures and why are they getting more hierarchical, why are the people at the top getting more all the time, and actually starting to advocate for something else, which is cooperative structures. Cooperatives work in some places, cooperatives are used, they can work. It's difficult for all of us because we haven't been brought up that way to understand that, but cooperatives are an alternative model that can work, and we could start advocating for cooperatives instead of hierarchies. Thanks.
Thank you for that challenging, and going back to basics and what underlies some of these issues. If I could take you now and then over there, and then we'll ask our panel to respond to those questions. So, yep, go
I'm
ahead.
Rafael Lenchuca from McGill University. It's actually hard to follow that reflection. I think that's beautiful. I have a question. So it seems like the recommendations that are being proposed on this panel, and thank you for them, it's really intriguing, and I think this is an important discussion to have. Much of it seems very technical and structural, and I'm curious to know from the panel as well as from people in the audience how we kind of, so my thought is that much of the problems that we're facing are deeply ideological. And so how do we bring forward technical and structural propositions and solutions to systems that are deeply entrenched in particular views of the state, the citizen, and the market? And so I'm just curious to hear people's reflections on how do we move beyond kind of getting stuck in the quagmire of ideology while also recognizing that we're proposing very technical solutions that are ideas based.
Thank you very much for that. Again, taking us back to basics. And one more question, and then we'll see what we can respond on that one.
Hello, good afternoon. Judy Mahoul from the American University of Beirut, Lebanon. Very quickly, the issue of, thank you very much for the speakers, very interesting, always learning in this conference for me. The issue of the taxation in resource poor countries such as ours, in the Arab world, and in some places, in most places of Africa, for example, the there is not a system to ensure equitable distribution, even if we do have taxes. And I was just the idea of issues related to corruption, and you have this fantastic barrel that drips taxation and the bottom is just sort of, there is no bottom, so the water goes and there is no use. So that's the problem in Lebanon, in many of the Arab countries, taxation, but not using taxation. It will not go to public good, it will go into politicians' pockets and political parties. And another example is Ethiopia and Somalia. They spend a lot of money on armament, and their people are hungry. And there are a lot of statistics about that. In the discussion about transnational corporations, have I yet seen in this conference, wonderful conference, any indication or mention of companies that distribute or sell arms. Big Pharma is an important, very important point, and that affects health directly. But there are underlying causes, such as industries that provide and produce arms and sell to warring factions. That's something very important. In the pharma, actually, David, I guess maybe he didn't have time to talk about that, but even the unethical practices in the production of their goods, or the pharmaceutical or the medicines. The problem is very much related to, in my view, is the environment within which the workers work, and the production, and the other transnational corporations such as Coca-Cola, and the use of the natural environment in other places of the world. What do we do? I think we need to do a lot of critical thinking, first of all, to understand the issue, the root causes of the issues, rather than dealing with things that we think are there. Because I know from our parts of the world, there are different views of what evidence means. So evidence could be, all we talk about here is are things that we don't talk about in our parts of the world. We see things differently. We talk about political alliances. We talk about the West dominating the South. We talk about arms deals. We talk about fueling the rich dominating the poor. So I think we need to do a lot of critical thinking to really understand the causes, and critically think about what kind of evidence do we need before we rush in to suggest what needs to be done. And I think that's very important from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, could I invite our panelists, and if you could perhaps just make some brief comments, because I'd really like just to invite one more round of questions before we spend a good 10 minutes on wrapping up. So yes, just some brief comments. Is that okay from each of our panelists?
About the last, in reverse order, and I think the problem with the taxation issues in low-income countries, I wouldn't sort of say that they're resource poor. I think that they're resource unequal. A lot of the African countries have quite valuable natural resources. Those are basically being exploited globally at very, very low rents. So the South Centre, for example, in Geneva has been trying to work with those governments about how to sort of shift some of those rent agreements around so they get a more reasonable return on their fixed endowments. The issue of corruption, it's there. I think the only thing that will work there is strong civil society movements or actors within those countries to sort of hold their in-country people to account, or kind of sort of track and monitor them. But it also has an international dimension in terms of when corrupt politicians scoop up funds, they don't stay in the country. They go into tax havens. So again, it goes back to the idea of really being hard on criminalizing tax evasion. The question about social impact bonds is an intriguing one. I'm skeptical at the present time. It's because those who are going to invest in those social impact bonds are already going to be primarily those in the top 1%, top 5%, top 10%, the ones that have investment income on hand to be able to do that. I like the idea that they're linked to some sort of positive benefit or gain, but we've seen that with public-private partnerships in the past with those sorts of arrangements. But what they really do become is a kind of a bit of a guaranteed return on investment of a fairly substantial amount, given the uncertainty of investment environments globally right now. So there's been some arguments that those could actually just be another form of safer, more secure capital accumulation. I agree that we should try to get rid of hierarchies. I don't know that if we ever can. I'd certainly be in favor of flattening the hierarchies, which I remember now what the French presidential candidate, what his policy was. He sort of said 100% taxation on any income that's 100 times more than the median income in the country. I recall that once upon a time with the Mondragon worker co-ops, the rule was that the people at the top could not make more than 7 times the people at the bottom. So, I mean, it's about sort of flattening those hierarchies. And I think there, Miranda, her points about the importance of progressive wide taxes, the taxes that we know worked, is really incredibly important. And Raf, about how do you get technical solutions into ideologically divisive environments? I think you just have to play the same kind of ideological games in reverse, which is why I thought that one of these days in Canada, if I ever have time, I think I will try to sponsor a day without government to sort of counter the Fraser Institute's, like your tax-free day. So I think that it's just finding mechanisms to sort of insert and disrupt, so to speak, in the current language or argot, those ideologies. You need to sort of fight the ideological framing of the problem as well as providing some of the technical solutions. If you just go on the technical solutions, you're going to lose.
Do you want to go next? I think you haven't. I'm happy to.
A lot of the comments, I think, are contributions to discussion, and I have enjoyed them and respect them, and I don't think anyone's wanting me to respond to them. But there's a couple of things I'd like to share in terms of my takeaway from this discussion. One is how public health people articulate with the technical experts in other areas. And I really appreciate Miranda coming and being with us today, because we can have a kind of amateur interest in taxation or in political economy or in whatever. And we need to have that level of expertise, that amateur level of expertise, so we can dialogue and listen to and understand what the experts are saying. So one of the things for me I'm taking away is that this is a very important part of our conferencing. It should be, is to build a richer dialogue with the experts about whose work we are already talking. So even if it is slightly embarrassing. And I think in that context, the discussion about health impact statements are in relation to tax, the comment comes to my mind is that the theoretical base for an impact statement about a tax initiative is going to be so contested. On the one hand, you'll have the neoclassical economists who want to put it through a equilibrium, whatever, do model, and then you'll have people who take a different view of how to conceive the way the economy works. I'm currently reading a paper about the exogenous and endogenous money, and this sounds terribly abstruse, but it's absolutely fundamental to how you think about macroeconomics. And some people have this and some people have that. And anyway, so I think that I want to make that point. Secondly, about ideology, I think that these things are ideological in the sense that we bring our own experience and our own worldview and our own aspirations to the discussion. That's not a bad thing. Not all ideology is vested interests and plotting and planning. A lot of, in fact, if we had a rich conversation, mostly we would come to some agreement about the key things, and the plotters and ideological manipulators would be much more in the minority, I think. I don't know if I'm making much sense. But the same, Finally, I just want to thank Miranda again, because I've always had this, and I think a lot of us do, have this gut reaction to direct taxation, to indirect taxation, which is that it's regressive. But the picture of the Nordic countries reminds you that if you've got an equal society, there's nothing regressive about indirect taxation. It's the fact of inequality which makes the indirect tax regressive. And so we need to bring back the issue of equity and equality into that debate, I think,
I'm conscious that you want to go back to people, so actually just one brief response to that comment. So value-added taxes, GST, trade taxes on, they are regressive relative to income of individuals and households, but the reality is that the rich do consume a lot more than the poor of everything, right? And so when you're designing the base of a tax like that, you have to understand that consumption takes place throughout the economy and across. And so I do more or less accept, although it's hard to deliver, that it is better to have these broad-based taxes, but you need to somehow be delivering public goods to those low-income households, right? And delivering adequate income to those low-income households. You have to be doing that. So the one doesn't come without the other. So just to be clear about that. Having said that, if you can do it, they do raise a lot of revenue, which is what you need, right? So just very briefly, I'm quite sceptical on social impact bonds. We don't like taxes, do we? We really don't. We keep trying to find other things, other ways to somehow harness resources, right, for delivery of goods, whether those goods are railways for cities, right, or social welfare. I'm not convinced that every policy or regulatory measure is an implicit tax. Don't forget, it allocates distribution of benefits and burdens. And taxes are in many ways the most transparent way to allocate benefits and burdens in a society. Social impact bonds may be doing exactly the same thing, but in a less transparent way. So it's not that I oppose them, it's a very interesting idea, but I'm a bit sceptical. A bit like Ron. So just one other comment and then I'll leave you. So there is a lot of work being done on tax collection in African countries. And most of that work is about trying to make it more transparent, trying to build trust, trying to build capacity in administrations, and trying to harness the nascent global cooperation in administration, tax havens and so on, so as to, and multinational corporations, so as to support those domestic tax collection mechanisms. On ideology, tax is intensely political. So you seem to be saying that some of the things we're talking about are technical or somehow instrumental rather than more deeply philosophical. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think every technical decision actually is a highly political one about the allocation of benefits and burdens. And taxes are directly tied to the kinds of governmental structures that we have in relation to the market. You could rethink all of that. That's your ideological exercise, I guess.
Gosh, well, my reaction to some of this is that I kind of agree with everybody, even if it's slightly different, saying different things. I'm a very malleable mind. What I thought we'd do now is, because I am still conscious of any final comments from anybody, but what I would like is to ask Ryan. I know it's going to be a bit hard, Ryan, so don't fret too much, but if you could just spend about 5 minutes, no more please, 3 to 5, summing up just some of the main messages that have come through with you as a completely independent If you'd like to come
Not
up
my
here.
area, by the way.
Seems to
So.
me it's a big
So
ask.
we'll do that, and then
With no existing ideology.
no existing, no value-free comments here. So Ryan, if you like to, well, whatever you like, stay down there or come up here, whatever you feel comfortable about, and then we'll just have perhaps just a couple of minutes on, do we want to go anywhere at all in terms of any thoughts for for sort of a recommendation to the conference, in which case I'll have to have a bit of a discussion with somebody or other, and then any final comments. So that's what I hope we have time for in the next 10 minutes. So Ryan, just brief summary,
Yeah.
value free.
Okay, yes. Thanks for this opportunity, by the way. So I'll just summarise what I heard, what I took in from the talks, and then I'll speak briefly on what came up in the discussion. So Ron was first up today. He provided us with a good outline, I thought, on the current state of inequality in this area. He pointed out that the inequalities aren't actually getting better, but are getting quite a bit worse, with 8 men now owning the same wealth as the poorest half of humanity. He outlined the social development goals that were of relevant to this particular area. He made a strong argument, that they do need some tweaking, specifically need a stronger goal with respect to addressing poverty. He then closed with 3 targets that could form a platform on which we could advance. First was to reduce inequality through progressive taxation and policies to encourage policies that benefit labour and not capital gains. And then finally, producing sustainable policies and quality education for women and girls. Miranda was up next. She went on to talk about tax, and it was very interesting for me. I haven't heard it talk in that detail before, so thank you for that. She provided us with a good background of tax, focusing specifically on the Australian tax system. She explained how states usually tax their people, with their systems usually being characterised by high consumption taxes, low corporate taxes, and high tax rates on labour. She pointed out the difficulty that lower income countries can have in generating tax. And she pointed out some of the ways that we could combat tax fairness, and inequalities. She ended up with summarising, excuse me, I'm having a lot of trouble reading what I've written on this piece of paper.
You're coming across very well.
Oh, thank you. Yes. A key section was on information sharing and cooperation between countries with respect to sharing information on taxes, which could be a way to, Okay. And David was up next. He talked about transnational corporations, focusing specifically on Big Pharma. He outlined the pros and cons associated with some of the policy objectives in that area, and these included those concerning medicine development, production and distribution, equity access, and quality use. And these set up a good scene for thinking about particular regulations in this area. And in terms of regulation, he noted the importance of collaboration, education, and participations between health professionals, communities, and the transnational corporations. That brings us to the discussion. And I admit that this was a mess for me trying to record these things properly. And so the first set of questions dealt with health impact assessments. And then we had a question on what are the best tax options, and also the best way we could, same question actually, but just more specific. The best way is to tax to improve health. And I must point out here, I don't know what it is about physics, I don't understand physics well, but I couldn't take in much of what Ron was saying, unfortunately. I'm not sure how that happened, and so I did miss a good section of this, but I'll try and let you know something. I did see you all nodding a lot, so hopefully you've picked that up and not me. And so,
Ryan, we might call it a day here and come back to it.
Okay.
But we've just got a few minutes, and so I think I'll just throw the floor open just for another minute or two.
wise move, I think.
Okay, and then we'll come back. Because I am conscious, of the fact that we get kicked out really, really promptly at these things, by the way. You know, there's no question. Bit of experience there. So I know that one person wants to talk briefly, but I would just like to return to the idea of we're not going to frame up any resolutions or policy statements today, that's for sure. If nothing else, this has taught us a lot about complexity. But if there is a wish to make any kind of recommendation to the World Federation at this point, we would need, a 1-minute idea on how to do that, and I would have to have a bit of a think and talk with someone about how to do it. I'm certainly very willing to help carry that forward, but is there a wish or to do that? And if not, that's fine, and we'll have our next commentator. Well, the Melbourne call for action or demand for action has already been consulted on with partner organisations, so we're not going to be changing that tomorrow. What I did take as a possible idea from your idea was the way to just write down a couple of thoughts where we would ask the World Federation to develop policy in a position statement, sort out what its basic values and assumptions were, and some of its technical ideas, because they're intimately all connected, on issues to do with financial underpinnings of the world system, both at international and national levels, with the aim of reducing inequalities and reducing unsustainability. Now, that might have to be done over several, over a long period. We might just wish to signal an interest to the PHA, the World Federation, that that's what we would like. A comment here? Sorry, I realise I'll come back to you. Sorry.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
When we're talking about SDGs, there's a very interesting, recently written article in The Lancet about the challenges of meeting any SDGs in the Arab world, and the whole article would apply to other nations of the world as well. It's the challenge of militarization. So I would love to see maybe a session later on next year, or if people are interested, we could move this forward somehow. We have never looked at, so far, to my knowledge, the relationship between militarization, transnational corporations, and global health.
Okay, thank you. That sounds a great idea to carry on to the next Congress. Yes.
My question is not in relation to those resolutions, but my name's Sally Forrest. I'm from Western Australia. I'm a public health doctor over there. I've got a couple of comments. I'm a bit concerned about the idea of a day of no government, just in that I think there's significant, I don't know if perhaps that's a joke, but
I think it might have been.
Yeah, okay, right. Because I think, the unintended consequences of that could be huge. And I think it really plays into the whole frame of neoliberalism and would just be marketing for them. I suppose my question is just, which I've been thinking about a bit lately, but, some of the policies that came through in Australia, particularly in the 70s, around public education, universal healthcare, is it possible to go back to a society that's pushing for those kind of public goods? And particularly at that time, that's when, the neoliberalism was really taken over by the corporate lobby as an idea, and they, used 4 strategies to really come to what we have today, which is taking over the media largely, taking over our political system and putting in a lot of politicians, and also think tanks in our public institutions. There's another one.
But, you know, is it possible to have a counter movement that includes those 4 strategies? And my other question is, in terms of public health and what role public health plays, I wonder how we can be part of a much bigger movement rather than just staying within the same profession all the time, in terms of how could we work with social movements, and could we be a leader in that? You know, there isn't really a leader of that, and I'm not sure that the union movement, for example, could do that, but is there a role for public health there?
Okay, thanks very much. I think David might have something to say on that last suggestion.
Just make a brief response to that. I think it would be really fabulous. I don't know what your audience or your members or your reach is, but I think it would be fantastic if the public health associations nationally and globally called for universal public goods on education, early childhood education, public health. Now, these are things that some countries still maintain quite strongly, but they do need financing. And if you don't have a very clear call that that's a good that you should be aiming for, it's difficult to call for the financing required for that.
The public health sector alone calling for that is not powerful enough. We don't have enough power.
Yeah.
So we need a whole of societal push for that. So.
Thanks very much, and we'll have just one final comment, I'm afraid, before handing a two-second comments from each of our panellists to end. But yes, over to you.
Just to go back to the declaration really quickly, just to point out the other sort of massive oversights, not only the climate change and disarmament, but also there's no mention of mental health, there's nothing about LGBTIQ populations, there's nothing about people with disability, people of colour, and I just did a quick look at the Kolkata call for action, which was much more extensive, and this being a demand for action, I would just expect it to have more coverage of those things. So.
Okay, that might be a discussion for tomorrow. Well, thank you very much. I think we've just only got sort of a couple of, 30 seconds each, but I would ask our panellists just any final comments that you might have, any final ideas or comments?
2. The first, a point of clarification. I would not actually suggest you kind of promote a day without government. The only time you would do that is if you had a Fraser Institute that goes out annually and at a certain point in time talks about your tax-free day. The response then is immediately to say, okay, well then let's have it as a day without government, and then point out all the things that people couldn't do. So it's to make the connection between the taxes and the services people take for granted. But around kind of the World Federation, how you're going to sort of promote this, and the fact that this was partly around taxation, I think maybe what you need to do is sort of like take some inspiration from those 4 million worldwide, kind of protests the day after Trump's inauguration. So I won't be here, so, but maybe some of you just need to sort of make some placards, get together your chanting routine, like someone, what do we want? More tax, right? Why do we want it? To make a fairer, healthier, and environmentally protected world. When do we want it? Now, right? And just go for it.
Right, well, David and Miranda, you might find it a bit hard to follow that.
I don't think I have anything to add. Go for it. I should say I was actually, coincidentally, I hadn't met Ron. I was also at the Women's March in Toronto the day after Trump's inauguration, and it was an excellent experience.
Didn't do much good, though, did it?
Oh, don't judge too soon.
Okay, sorry.
But I think that as more and more people continue to mobilize and keep that kind of action on the streets going, it doesn't change in itself, but it sort of keeps the visual of opposition to those types of statements, policies, and activities. And as I mentioned in another panel, is that one of the things that's happened in Canada right now, 15 to 20% of Canadians who had planned holidays in the United States canceled them. And had canceled their tickets. The Girl Guides of Canada are no longer going to be traveling to the United States to their sister organizations, and Toronto School Board, the largest in the country, has now said until further notice the border is closed.
Okay, I withdraw my sort of derision there. David, any final comments before we close?
We're over time.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being such a lively and engaged audience. I think you'll agree all of our panellists have done a tremendous job. So thank you very much to all of us and to Ryan. I wish you good night and see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.